is our final webinar for the series. And we have the fabulous Jane Smith, who is the Director of Data Products over at GSK. She's previously worked at companies such as Accenture and EY before. And today we are talking about why data should be behind decisions that e-commerce businesses make. Very hot topic for a lot of businesses at the moment. And Jane will be discussing 5 key questions around this subject, and then we'll open up to questions at the very end. But if you do have any questions, please put it into the chat, and then we can pose them to Jane throughout. But otherwise, in the meantime, I'll pass you over to Jane.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm so delighted to see so many people have joined, and I'm very well aware that data is definitely on the dry end of digital, but we'll keep this presentation engaging. I've got some things that I hope will make it come to life for you, be exciting for you, and nobody's allowed to leave until you all love data as much as I do. So if everybody's cool with that, we'll kick off. I was going to talk about 5 key questions today with data, because it's such a boil the ocean type topic. I thought I'd keep it to 5 things that people ask a lot, people talk about a lot. And the first one that I'll kick off with is data driven. So organizations talk about being data driven. What does that actually mean? So as you can, sorry, one second now. I've got some slides that I'll flip through as we speak, and really they're very text light, just to sort of synthesize the key spirit of each of the 5 questions. And instead of stock photographs, I've tried to illustrate each slide with some data art. I'm a big fan of beautiful data visualization and data art, so enjoy that while I'm speaking. So data driven, what does it actually mean? And I think, you know, the potential to lose yourself in a sort of vortex of buzzwords really does loom large here. I think it tends to be helpful to come back to fundamentals. So for me, a data-driven organization will, as you can see here, collect, organize, and access data with the goal of better serving your customers. Now, it sounds terribly basic, but these really are big foundational things to do. And many companies, particularly big companies, are, you know, trying to do this retrospectively, having historically always had data as the sort of output of the tech process, rather than seeing it as the corporate asset in its own right. So if we maybe touch on some of these things, you know, collecting data is hard, or collecting accurate, clean, trustworthy data is hard. Data usually is dirty, and if I bring it into the marketing environment, which I know many of you here today work in, you'll probably be familiar with the challenges of things like sales data. They come from different vendors, they come in different formats, they vary by country, by city, by retailer. Integrating that data into your systems, hooking it up to APIs, querying it with vendors, you know, rolling it up to common hierarchies. It takes a lot of time to do that. And by the time someone has a data set they can work with, there's really a lot of engineering and cleansing that's gone into it already. So accessing data, I think in a lot of firms, there's often the misconception that having a lot of data makes you data driven. And I think really, unless you have the systems and the processes to sort of separate out these vast oceans of structured and unstructured data into something meaningful, you're probably paying a lot of money to store terabytes of junk. So the right tools need to be in place to join data to enterprise data and to run queries. Better serve our customers, and I think this is really the crux of a definition here. There's always an element of to what end, in my view. And maybe if I illustrate it with an example of some work I was doing recently with a first-party data solution, and this was driven from marketing to enable us to have a direct relationship with our consumers. And everything about this use case, which involved branded novelty toothbrushes in Germany, was really, really perfect. It was going to set us up for this amazing D2C campaign, really get us close to our customers, except for when we looked at the data and saw that we, you know, on average would shift about 10 of those toothbrushes. So we were not serving our customers better with this. Apart from those 10, we were serving those 10 very well. So I'm being glib, it wasn't 10 customers, but it wasn't 10 million either. But a good illustration, I think, of where there's data, there's good intent, good ideas, but the customer hasn't been in mind. So to be a data-driven organization, so like we said, one that collects, organizes, and allows access to data to better serve customers, I think really two key things should be in place. So firstly, investment in data, and secondly, a data culture. So investment, tools, technologies, not just the sort of the exciting futuristic tools that are going to use AI to enhance your rules-based content personalization, or ML to, you know, deploy cool customer chatbots, but foundational stuff, things that centralize your master data, things that safely store your first-party data for your marketing, your D2C campaigns. And not just on the tool side, but also in the organization. You know, your function that is dedicated to data strategy, data governance, management, even before you get to things like data innovation and data science. And to maintain all that, of course, you know, as new data streams come on, they need to be clearly articulated, how they fit into the data hierarchy and organization. So culture then, and I think probably we'd all agree that a data literate organization is very important at the moment. And what a great data thought leader always says to me is data literate is a minimum, data enthusiasts are the goal. So people need to be familiar with data sets. And if I bring this into the marketing world, and I use an example of something we recently did at GSK, we took quite a lot of time to set up workshops around Europe, crafted to deliver to brand and marketing managers to get them trained for a new data tool that we'd invested in quite heavily. And essentially that it was a self-serve tool for marketing efficiency metrics. We decided not to make the session just about the tool though. We made the session the GSK approach to media performance measuring and its relationship to marketing measurement, things like marketing mix modeling, brand performance systems, brand lift, things like that, linking to data maturity, attribution. I think had we just focused on the data tool, it would have educated brand managers for sure about things like in-flight optimization, using data to drive campaigns. But as part of a bigger session about our measurement culture, our data culture, we're able to set out things like that KPI framework of efficiency, effectiveness, the prioritization process. And a great thing I heard at the end was some of the marketing managers say, we've never felt we've been in a position to challenge this data with the agencies. We've always just had to sort of accept it, and now we are. So that was a great outcome for me. So how do you develop a data-driven culture? Well, I have a few ideas of things that we could, well, probably not my ideas, but here's a few sort of proven ways that you can get data integrated well into a culture. So training. What are the sources of meaningful data? Who owns what? What's expected? Things like I just spoke about, that those workshops, that measurement framework, that understanding, filtering for your organization. PR, I think this is an interesting one and something that I think the people on this call will be really very, familiar with and good at. But organizations, they're probably a lot more data-driven than we realize. I mean, there's no way that anybody in your finance departments, your marketing departments, your supply chains are really doing anything without some data there to drive it. So showcasing what good looks like quite often and quite widely is a great way to build that data culture. P&G, I think, do this really well. They create this external image of being data-driven like Amazon are. They do this through PR, engagement with agencies, conferences, really encouraging this throughout the firm. I think another way to help build a data culture, must make words happen, is to champion leaders who embrace data already, showcase what they're building, how it's benefiting the organization. And of course, we can drive behavioral change in lots of ways, big and small. So you can mandate that data is used in various meeting forums into a certain style. Amazon, for example, start the first 15 minutes of every meeting with the page around their data insights that they've collected over the last week or so. Change how meetings function. Do you have data to support your hypothesis? Do you have data to support your point? I don't imagine anybody at Google or Facebook or Amazon ever proposes anything without having quite a large volume of data behind them. So I'm going to take a pause from there. I hope that I've given you some idea about what being data-driven means and how to get there. And while we're still in the kind of the buzzword zone, I'll move us on to the next area I was going to look at, data democracy, because like being data-driven, data democracy is something I hear about a lot. And you can see my quote there on the left, who are the champions of data and who's going to use it? If the answer is everyone, it probably means no one. So we'll take a little look into that. So is data democracy just a fancy way of saying self-serve? Maybe have a think about that while we speak. So, I mean, fundamentally, data democracy is to allow non-specialists to be able to gather and analyze data without requiring outside help. So, great, no gatekeepers, no bottlenecks, awesome. It's freedom to access data and create value for your company. And the driving idea is that enabling business users to define their own information requirements and giving them the tools to do this really energizes processes, marketing, sales, etc. Now, there's obvious concerns with data democracy, and some acknowledgement of those concerns and some ways to work with them. I mean, data obviously can be misinterpreted by employees who aren't well versed with it. The more users who have access to the data, the bigger the security risk, the more challenges there are to maintaining data integrity, duplication of efforts across different teams. I don't know if anybody on the call has ever had the task that I had a little while ago of running a quick audit of anybody with data in their job title. It was big. There's obviously this is how shadow functions get built as well, when people just decide they need to hire someone to do these things that 5 people are already also doing. So I think strong governance in place and a culture of not just data democracy, but data responsibility. What is the firm's approach to data? What are our guardrails around it? How do we manage data risk? Has everyone been through the training? Is everyone aware of it? Do we continually reinforce this throughout our meetings? I think as I said, if the answer is everyone is the champion of data, it probably means no one. So to do data democratization well, tools that filter data and visualization appropriately so that marketing managers can analyze customer segments leading up to a new campaign, CMOs can see their ROI, as they build next year's budgets across the region, etc. Data democracy also is likely to be a big cultural shift for an organization, and many organizations are, on the way to being a data democracy at various stages of the journey. But it's that cultural journey, it moves us away from, oh, the analytics team will get that for me, they do that for me, to, oh, I can do it myself, or, oh, I have to do it myself. So there's really a piece of work here about raising the level of data literacy, familiarization with data sets in an organization, and it doesn't happen overnight. So we're investing at GSK quite heavily in this through a mix of formal and informal training, and I encourage anybody quite strongly who has the opportunity to do something like this to take that advantage. These the skills to build for the world of today and also the world of 5 years, 10 years time. So I'll just move us on, maybe away from the buzzwords of data-driven and data democracy to some data challenges. And I just call your attention to that lovely data viz. It's one of my favorites on the right there, that's done by a data artist, Alberto Lopez. And he did an analysis of Picasso's obsessions in the style of the painter himself. I just think sometimes the beautiful things you can do with data are really, really lovely. Anyway, side note. So back to the challenges of data. So I'm going to start us off on a dry one, but bear with me, this is important. So master data. hugely important. And for those of you not familiar, I might just give a quick rundown. So master data is the core enterprise data necessary to run the business. It's usually a combination of things like product data, finance data, factory data, vendor data. It's this core sort of stuff that doesn't change very much, but you need it to run any kind of transaction. So if we think about product data, it would be things like the product attributes, the product category, product description, the price. So all of this stuff that obviously is a big part of e-commerce, product information management systems. We know from studies that robust master data drives consumer confidence, marketing advantages through better product information, better, and this is both on the packaging and the online elements. And in the FMCG world, we're seeing companies take quite bold steps to address these challenges. So PMG, again, they've been working with their master data to minimize operational risk. Colgate's improving their global spend analysis. I think for me with master data, I've never worked in a company that had good master data. And I think the temptation here is to always say, well, we've kind of, got this far, we do this well with it working at whatever percentage. Do we really need to have it working perfectly? No, but if you do, you're setting yourself up for massive advantages. Data overload. I'm sure there's not a single person on this call that hasn't faced that. Tame the data. There's so much structured data, unstructured data. So a piece of work I did recently, I worked with brand and marketing managers to get my arms around the data landscape to try and see what we actually had and where. I discovered more than 30 sets of dashboards, KPIs, metrics that had been created to help brand and marketing managers to track their campaigns. And on average, they used 3 of them. Some used 4, but mostly they used 3 of them. So I think as well as massively overwhelmed marketing managers, there's also the slight problem that it must be taking a lot of people a lot of time to create, maintain, maybe even pay licensing costs for all the stuff that no one's looking at. And the answer really has to be clear measurement frameworks tied to strategic objectives and supported by senior leaders. I'm going to talk about a challenge, small data, mostly because I like the sort of the contrariness of when everyone talks constantly about big data. I like that there's also small data. So small data, kind of like what it sounds like, and probably more of a challenge to FMCG companies than probably for Google. But sometimes we have too few data points to make a robust analysis. So, for example, we do a promotion for a small segment of a brand in a single retailer, maybe something like Aquafresh whitening in Tesco. Run one promotion. You don't get a lot to work with. So the way that we deal with small data is proxies, estimates, scenario modeling, so you can evaluate different assumptions. But I think just an interesting challenge contrast to the constant big data, huge data. So I think another challenge, and I think anybody in anything above a medium-sized business will really feel this, and this is fragmented data ownership or no data ownership. So I find the management of data quality, usually it's driven by multiple stakeholders, and it's usually measured at a department by department level rather than across the business as a whole. So our attitude to this in GSK is we don't believe that we have R&D data that starts off at the beginning when we're trying to formulate products, come up with new things. And then we have supply chain data that looks after our logistics data, our manufacturing data, etc. And then we have sales and commercial data. We believe that it's all data, it's all enterprise data, it's all our kind of our shared asset. And it's all there for us to use and to gain value from. So I think to get here, a good data culture will massively help you with this, because it is dependent on individuals to put their head above the parapet and to take very much an enterprise-wide view of data. It's a mindset of, it's our shared asset. It's not stuff that's useful for my particular function. It's a highly collaborative exercise to get to if you can network, be close to your peers in different parts of the organization and take that view of data. Right, I feel like I've labored that point, so I'm going to stop now. I'll touch on leadership in data as a challenge. We're seeing more and more chief data officers come into companies as data becomes higher and higher on the agenda, and data really does seem to be on the radar of the most senior people in organizations. And data leadership, obviously all leadership principles apply to data leaders, but I think there is something unique in the role of a chief data officer, because this is a person who has to lead a function that is its own function, but just touches every single aspect of the business. A leader in data also has to be somebody who can champion a lot of work that is unseen. There's a lot of sort of unglamorous housework with data, stuff I spoke about at the top of the call, the cleansing, the engineering, the ingesting, the APIs. This is all time consuming. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. Nobody massively wants to hear about it, but very necessary part of anybody having their dashboard that tells them what they've sold last month. So I'm not going to talk about data security and data privacy, just because I feel it's so well covered, especially at the moment, as it really should be. But I do have a data challenge that's in the ethics vein. And this won't be anything new to you, but I think it's important to mention. Our cognitive biases really are amplified when it comes to evaluating data. And at the end of a really sort of rigorous, complicated, exhaustive piece of analysis, we're still dependent on a human to draw an inference and make a decision on the basis of that data. And I think it's that decision point where you have to assess the meaning of the data that our biases really do come into play. Many of us, we tend to trust or rely on data that supports our position and suppress mentally the data that does the opposite. Cognitive bias, I guess it's called. And we also tend to trust sources from data we like, we tend to trust data from sources we like, or we tend to rely heavily on data that has the advantage of recency. So it's things to keep in mind, and I hope as data becomes more and more a part of the forefront of companies, businesses, that we all think a little bit more about these questions. So I'll move us on into from the present to the future, data trends for 2020. And I'd say the first trend is probably one that you've all seen very much in the last few months, and this is the raised profile of data from coronavirus, probably one of the very few things that we can thank the coronavirus for. So I don't know about you, but I feel like a few months ago, the ONS was sort of a blip on people's consciousness. Nobody ever really talked about it. And now suddenly everybody's saying things like, well, Germany take their data differently. They don't take this into consideration. And I never heard people say things like that before. And it's great. I mean, this is the way of our world that's going. And it's great that people have a mindset towards data. So if I think about some of the trends we're going to see, there are a lot of trends. I'll try to pick the more exciting, more relevant ones. But if I start in the tech world, I think natural language processing and conversational analytics are going to get their forecast to make quite big strides in the next couple of years. So natural language processing is an easier way to ask questions about data and receive an explanation of the insights. The conversational analytics then takes that concept a step further and enables questions to be posed and answered verbally rather than through the visual element. So I think I read a statistic we're supposed to see this boost the participation of employees in data and analytics, I think from currently about 35% to about 50% in the next few years. On the tech side, still, data fabric is something that I find quite interesting. I'm really looking forward to it. So it's a single environment essentially, and it consists of a unified architecture, services, and technologies running on that architecture. And it really helps organizations to manage their data. It's a kind of like a frictionless access and sharing of data in what generally tend to be distributed data environments. So if you were listening carefully to what I said earlier, and I know you were, this would solve a lot of those foundational problems that I spoke about. And where I spend my time now is in manufacturing data. I'm very much in the supply chain world. And this would just, I can see so much benefit in this environment. So the data coming from the machines, the production lines, the ERP system, local plant data, there's so much coming in from different sources, hard or often to integrate to match up. But many of the use cases that I have at the moment that look at things like machine optimizations would be a lot easier with Data Fabric. So if there's anybody on the call that's got more of an industrial data lens, keep an eye on this. I'll move away from tech trends more to consumer trends. And I think this should be very much of interest to marketing audience. I imagine many of you here are, if not familiar with this, then all over it. But data storytelling, so brands applying narratives to consumer data for these more kind of authentic, enlightening engagements. And so I sort of think of this as like those Facebook videos that they set up for you once a year, where they recap your past year for you, your most popular photographs, the people you spoke to most. There's lovely music in the background. First you feel a bit weird, then you kind of feel warm and fuzzy. Your personal data story, really, it's really just the front end of whatever, you know, a database of information they have about your browsing habits, your number of interactions. So if we apply that to something like banking transactions, I mean, for sure, we've all got ready access to, you know, your transaction history, you know, your payments, deposits, bills. I mean, unless anyone's still on a checking book, but you know, everyone can access this quite easily, right? But if you can get from your bank maybe a couple of times a year visual representation of your purchases, maybe organized into the categories, giving you some analytics, analysis, some insight into that, it becomes quite different. You can ask questions. Did I spend too much on going out? Should I maybe have invested rather than saved? It gives you a little bit more pause for thought. It allows you to engage with this, what is really quite dull data in a different way. I mean, really, it's your data story and you're the main character in that story. It's much more appealing to engage with. I think once you've got to that stage, it's then quite a small step to tack on recommendations. And I think Slack do this well. They'll show you, you know, channels that you've not really engaged with and suggest you might want to maybe leave some of those. You're not using your time best, or if you're spending too much time on the Pets at GSK channel. That's not me. I would never do that. So, and as we all know, as everybody on this call knows, you know, personalized customer experiences, as we know, they boost loyalty, they drive repeat purchases, cross-selling, upselling, and really evolve and strengthen our relationship with the brand. If I look at trends around data culture, I think what we're going to see, and really I'm already seeing it in quite forward-thinking organizations, data accountability reaches across the C-suite. So as mentioned earlier, there's a proliferation almost of chief data officers. They're increasingly common and they have an enterprise-wide mandate to put data at the core. I think in the future, the chief data officer really will be the norm. It won't be anything new or anything to get excited about. All executives will recognize data as a corporate asset and put it front and center of their operations. So I think leaders really will need to understand how their people use, share, present data, feel about data. Leaders will need to be active proponents of data rather than maybe passive recipients, as a lot of them are now. They'll receive their dashboards, get their information, maybe not champion it. They'll need to be advocates of data and empower their people with tools to have the data they need. It'll be an investment, a monetary investment, as well as an emotional investment in bringing that data culture up. So I think that's what I have to say on data trends for the year ahead. So probably what I'll touch on lastly is building data skills. Sorry, did I lose the, sorry. Can you see, is the screen share still functioning? Okay, good. Oh, so bear with me 1 second, I'm having it.
Oh no, I can see that still. It's still on the screen.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I would say a mix of formal and informal learning is a good way to start building skills. And I find learning good for helping to orient myself, you, anyone around the fundamentals. What is machine learning? What is it not? What is AI? What is it not? Getting quite clear on some of those, the applications of data science that sort of blend between analytics, business intelligence, data science. And there's a lot of formal and informal learning from which to draw from. So a progressive data company will have a lot of formal training that people can enroll in and have that investment in themselves. So I would encourage anyone to take those. There's a lot of training that you can go and find yourself. There's so much free stuff. I've done loads of the free courses online, and they really are really good for that grounding. On the job training, then just immerse yourself in it. I challenge anybody to tell me they work in a business that doesn't use data. There are opportunities to get involved, to learn, to be part of it. If you feel you work in a company that's not very data driven, be that champion, be that data person, build those skills. And I think this is a group of people that I don't need to lecture about how to go and build skills. So when I was thinking about this section, how do I frame this? I thought I might just share with you some of the sort of fun ways that I've tried to build my own data skills. And I know a lot of people would say fun and data don't go in the same sentence, but those people are wrong. So some nice things if you want to just make data part of your everyday life. Follow data artists and data visualists on Instagram. And I think the beauty and the artistry and the precision of some of the data work that goes on is just so, I just can't fail to be inspired and to think this is really a lovely thing to deal with. There have been some fantastic books in the last couple of years. I'm not actively plugging any books if anyone wants to message me afterwards, but I'd say one that stands out is Invisible Woman and How to Be a Chief Data Officer. And I think these have very, very different lenses towards data, but they just inspired so much. They give me so much to think about. If anyone has children, I've spent a lot of time with mine teaching them to do charts, graphs, bubble charts, work with data, understand data based on the number of unicorns and dinosaurs sighted in the garden over the last couple of weeks. And I think to be in the position where you can teach someone even basic stuff about data is just a lovely thing to do and raises your own awareness and love of data. And there I will finish.
Amazing, Jane. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions straight off the bat from people. But I guess I'll put a question out first. You mentioned that a lot of organizations are going through a journey to get more data-driven or become more data-driven. So from your experience, what would you say really works well from those leaders in the business, the data team and the other employees in the business? What would you say works really well to get everyone on board with this idea and keep progressing, year on year with how focused they are on data?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What works really well? So I think, like anything in a business, the leadership are there to lead and setting that tone from the top, and the appreciation that the data accountability and responsibility will sit with the chief data officer, but all senior leadership, they need to be part of this change. They need to recognize that this is the way a business is going, and that a business can only be empowered from having people that care about data, that want to use data. Setting that example, setting that tone, and there are quite a few senior leaders that are not well versed in data, but are making that investment in themselves to learn from scratch, to sharpen their skills, to get involved in projects, to ask questions. We have someone very senior in GSK, and she freely admits, she says, I Google everything. I don't know, but I want to know. I want to know what data means. I want to know how to do it. I want to be able to play with it. I want to appreciate it. And I think that's a great way to lead that charge. And I always think, not just for data, but for anything, you do not have to be senior to be a leader. Go look, find things you can get involved in. If there's no data champion, be the data champion, talk about it, think about it. So I think top down, bottom up.
Perfect. So there's a few questions that have just come through. So I don't know what this was in relation to. I think it may have been slide 3. Could blockchain contribute to this common data fabric?
See, this is why I like webinars. They keep me on my toes. Oh, that's a great question. That's a good one. Yes, is the answer. Blockchain, very, very exciting development, and very much, with provenance, origination, things like that, assuring trust where there isn't trust. We are seeing a lot of potential. We're just not quite there yet. And it feels like it's been this way for the last couple of years. I suppose probably the clearest, so Bitcoin and crypto is definitely the clearest application of blockchain. And I feel like for the last few years, there's been this sort of promise that blockchain will take over everything. It really will rise beyond that to have a lot more applications, but the applications are coming through slowly. So I see great things about like land transfer in Estonia, wine buyers who use blockchain. There's a great CEO based in London, Leanne Camp, Everledger. They use blockchain to ensure the provenance of diamonds, but they tend to be quite niche, quite small, whereas data fabric really is everything. It's like, I guess it says the data fabric. So I'm giving you a massive politician's answer here. I think, I don't really know, but I think the answer is absolutely blockchain has a part to play in this. Quite what it is in that, very, what's the word? Very wide environment just yet. I don't know. But thank you for that question. That was a tough one.
And then Tal has said, particularly impressed by the use of images. Thanks for the inspiration on the data art side of things. And then we have one from Sarah. So what are the key categories you are seeing increasing? And does the data give you enough info as to why they are doing well? Or do you feel that psychological info is also needed?
The key categories that we're seeing increase, and does the data support that? Yes. So I'm trying to think of an intelligent way to answer this, because I think all my answers are yes. So definitely, yeah, we're definitely seeing that our data does correlate to a lot of our category increases. I don't think there's any massive surprises there. And for sure, that psychological element is always going to be there. In fact, one of the challenges we find is sometimes the psychological element will outweigh the data. Particularly, this can be an issue where senior people have their psychological, their hunch, or their years of experience, that they feel very strongly about a certain thing. So I'm trying not to be too product specific here. And even though you put data in front to say, well, that's not quite the case, you're going to hit that resistance. And I don't quite know how to address that, because I've come up against it a few times. But what I think is that as data becomes more and more part of the norm of how we present, how we evaluate, and how we plan, it's going to be less of an issue. It's going to be harder to organize, to argue with data.
Celine says, in e-commerce, getting the data is an important step. What is more important is that the data leads to actions and supports business performance. What is your view on companies piling data that is not actionable?
Yeah, this happens a lot, doesn't it? It's expensive. You're expending energy on storage costs, on people to maintain it. And I do see this quite a lot. the kind of stockpiling of data, thinking our data is worth a lot of money. I mean, everybody thinks their data is worth a lot of money, but the reality is there's a lot of unstructured data out there that's not worth anything. It's there. So I think some of the themes that I hope I've tried to maybe subtly weave in throughout the presentation, especially towards the earlier part, is what's the purpose of the data? What do you want to do? It to what end? And I think a focus on that, data with purpose is your guiding light.
And then Ruben says, how do you get to visualize the data? Is there a software that allows you to visualize it?
Yeah, there's a lot of software tools. Wow, the world is your oyster with software tools. Sorry, I don't know if that question was in general or was it specific to GSK. I mean, in general, yeah, there's a lot of data visualization tools. You can create your own data visualization tools as well if you're that way inclined. There tends to be a few key data viz tools that are used by big companies. I think the Gartner quadrants would give you some good guidance there. I think almost the issue is there's just too many. Like, which ones do you choose? How do you? I mean, we have a lot of in-house UX specialists as well that'll design a lot of this stuff for us, so we don't have to procure them.
John asked a question. So, what tools do you use to automate some of the ways in which you gather and process data?
What we're starting to do more is build a lot of our own tools. I guess we use a lot, standard SQL databases. I'd like to say we don't do anything with spreadsheets. We do a lot with spreadsheets. We are a very large organization with a huge multitude of tools. So I'm going to leave that there if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And then Jackie says, if you work in a business that is not large enough to employ a chief data officer and where the data is in silos of IT, marketing, and finance, how would you tackle this?
Sure. Data culture. You might not be able to have a chief data officer, but you will have a team of execs. They will be keen to be focused on the future. They will not need a lot of convincing. I don't think that data is a really fundamental element for business going forward.
Perfect. If there's anyone who's a data champion within a business at the moment and doesn't necessarily have that data function, so it might be an SME or a mid-sized business, if you were in their position, how would you go about building a data function or a data team or that one data person? How would you tackle it? It's a very broad question, I understand, because there's so many different businesses, different sizes, different sectors. But just to get your thoughts on that, what do you think?
So the question is, how would you go about building a data team, whether it's a big company or a small, maybe it's more of a data champion, you're building the data team, what kind of the breadth? Yeah. Okay. So maybe if we start with the big company setting, I guess that's the one I'm more familiar with. Building a data team is something we've done recently at GSK. It's been an absolutely fantastic adventure. It starts with the acknowledgement that data is something important. It needs its own sphere of ownership. It cannot be a byproduct of tech or something that's just left there. So with that mindset, a chief data officer is your starting point usually. A good data team will have a strong data governance, data strategy pillar to it that can really get its arms around the enterprise-wide data and put the processes, the policies around it, as well as the vision for data. It will also have a data innovation. So many companies will have a lot of data that is just sitting there waiting to create value. So the innovation arm is releasing that value, unlocking it. Data science then is something we have invested in GSK, so we can build our own modeling, our own algorithms without having to go outside. And we also have a very strong emphasis in our data team around business partnering. So those key people that can look across the data team interact with the business, because a lot of the data doesn't just sit with us, it's all through the business. There will be data owners in the business, there will be data users in the business. So how are they hooked into that main team? So in a company that's smaller, if you don't have the money to build a 100-person strong data function, you've got maybe 1 or 2 people. I think get them off for some training, get them started on some projects, and have them sponsored by somebody senior. I think if somebody has shown that willing and that aptitude to go and be that person, let's have the senior people championing them, and greasing the wheels for them to go and have that conversation, giving them the sort of the time and the space to build those skills and put them in front of the right people and the right forums.
What are you most excited about for the future?
Ooh. Most excited about, I don't know, this question is very different with coronavirus, isn't it? What am I most excited about? I guess this is probably a data future question, isn't it? What am I excited for the data future? I'm gonna go off data actually. So one thing that I absolutely love to see, this is my sort of big bugbear that I usually bang on about in presentations, is in e-commerce is packaging, the kind of the amount of packaging. And I don't imagine there's anyone here who loves packaging and wants more packaging, but sustainable packaging, the kind of, one of your speakers spoke about it a lot earlier in the week, Jack, Paul, I think he talked about the kind of the value cycle. So how do products and services involve things that you have, you use, and then you give back and they're reused, recycle. I love that. That's something that I find really exciting.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are actually investing and looking at ways how they can be more sustainable. And yeah, Paul's talk was really, it gets you thinking, because there aren't a lot of people who actually talk about that within the kind of marketeers or even in the mainstream media. There's no one really who is talking about that from a kind of more commercial perspective, maybe other than Greta Thunberg, but yeah, I think in terms of there's a lot of comments here instead of kind of questions, so we can go through those quickly. So Sean says blockchain will be useful for verifying your data has not been tampered from cycle to the next and distributing it in your data democracy. But other than that, this is overhyped as a panacea by people who don't understand it. Ruben says, I'm used to working on Excel. Sean, I say that as someone who, instead of buying 70 Bitcoin in January 2011 at less than $1, I bought ASIC mining gear instead. Packaging and delivery are ignored, but so important.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, I joined too late. The Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple, always too late.
And then Talha says, marketeers are often guilty of using gut intuition to make decisions, even when they have access to loads of data, tools, and analysts. If you agree it to be true, how many times in percentage terms do you think you are guilty of doing this and making your marketing decisions? And how wrong or not too wrong is this to do?
You got to mute there, Jack?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, was the question?
Yeah, so he's asking, I think he's asking everyone this as well. So marketeers are often guilty of using gut intuition to make decisions, even when they have access to loads of data, tools, and analysts. If you agree it to be true, how many times in percentage terms do you think you are guilty of doing this and making your marketing decisions? And how wrong or not too wrong is this to do? But yeah, if there's any other questions, guys, please let us know. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there. And yeah, I really appreciate the presentation, Jane. Really good interaction from everyone. And it was a good final webinar to round the whole series off. Really appreciate it. And yeah, if you want to connect with Jane, if you have any further questions, you can find her on LinkedIn. If not, give me a buzz and I can make an intro. But yeah, really appreciate everyone who's attended the webinar so far, including this one. And yeah, enjoy the bank holiday, guys.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thank you so much, everybody. It really was a pleasure. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.